Okay, this is Sergeant Richard Davies of the Pine Bluff Police Department. He's been in uh, various jobs there. And how long were you a school resource officer?
School resource officer for 8 years
And that was at which school?
at Jack Roby Junior High in Pine Bluff
So you've been around, you've been doing this youth violence issue for how long?
since about 1994.
All right, now let's talk a little bit specifically about the Arkansas Safe Schools Conference. This is the fifth one that you've put on.
Right, Steve, it's the 5th annual conference that we have for the Safe Schools.
And give me the history of Safe Schools. How did it come to be?
Safe Schools Association came about when we were trying to find or form an organization made up of school resource officers in the state of Arkansas. We included school administrators, school safety personnel, anybody that was interested in the safe and orderly climate of a school. We thought that was very important because partnerships are very important.
So the sharing of information, you sort of bridged, you were one of the first associations that really sort of bridged that gap between educators and police officers that typically existed.
Right, in Arkansas, absolutely, absolutely.
How important do you think that what was the purpose of Arkansas Safe Schools? How did it come to pass? I mean, how was it birthed?
Well, actually what we saw a need for training specific to Arkansas. I mean, there's training all over the country, but training specific to Arkansas. What we also saw was a need to bring very consistent training that was the same across the board. So if you had somebody in a small town of 500 or 1,000 people that had a little school, the same training was going to apply to them as would apply to somebody in a school of 4,000 or 5,000. So you have very consistent training that was affordable, free in many, many instances. This conference, like $75 for 3 days, is some of the best breakout sessions you could possibly have. That was one of our goals. We wanted to bring it together and make the program consistent across the state. What a wonderful tool to be able to call a neighboring district and when you have any type of incident and have SROs that are all on the same page, administrators that are all on the same page that can come together and help solve a crisis or any other incident that happens.
When, let's go back 5 years to the first annual Safe Schools Conference. I think this conference you have over 200 people.
Yes.
From cross disciplines, various disciplines.
Absolutely.
So what about the first one? How is this different than the first one?
It was a little smaller. Our concept has not changed at all. There's a few more people here now, but our concept has not changed at all. We've just made it better, expanded it a little bit, but our primary goal, that of bringing together law enforcement school partnerships and building on those, has not changed at all. We're even working to make it where it's a mandatory type thing. You must go through this particular training in order to be a resource officer. It's important. These are our kids. It's a safety. And you want somebody in there that understands how to use that triad concept of teaching, counseling, and law enforcement. Not just law enforcement on this side and discipline things and school policies on this side. It has to be together. You have to have an officer that understands what it takes, what it takes to make the program work.
Well, let's talk about you for a second. What's driven you over the years? What's made you stay in this? Because this is a very nerve-wracking business when you're dealing with kids and you don't. I know. I remember you and I years ago when we first started doing this. We chatted about how do you rectify not being able to save them all? How do you deal with that?
Well, that's a tough one, and you can't save them all. But when you know you at least tried, that does make a difference. There's a lot of self-satisfaction that comes from doing this job, because when you get the emails, you get the hugs, you get the letters, you get the comments made, oh, I remember when we did this, and oh, thank you for doing that. Yeah, there's a lot of self-satisfaction that goes with this job. But I was one of those kids. I was one of those kids that would have loved to have had somebody to sit down with me and talk to away from family or anybody else. And I could remember so clearly the one or two people, teachers that made comments. They're still ingrained in my head today. So I know the importance of that tiny little bit of support, that tiny little bit of pat on the back, that hug, that word of encouragement. It's made a lifetime change in me, totally. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing today. And personal satisfaction, absolutely.
How important do you think the entire community involvement in this issue is? And also, how important do you think mentoring is to many of these young people, because I know you've dealt with some of the saddest cases, and Pine Bluff, for people that don't know, has suffered from some problems over the years, and like every community,
Right,
not
every
just Pine
community,
Bluff,
right, every community's got issues.
school districts have issues, and
Right.
it's all about funding. But what would you say that could be done in a community that wouldn't require a lot of funding?
Well, when we started, when I went into the schools, my first instructions were, Davies, do what you do. Well, I didn't have a clue as to what that was. I went into the schools and I learned what I needed to do. There was no funding, so you made do with what you had. And what I found out real quick, it doesn't take a lot of money to show somebody that you care. You're just there. If the community comes together, the PTAs and the teachers associations and all that, you don't need money. You just don't need money. I would go to a small meeting somewhere and say, oh gosh, we got to have this, we got to have door product. No, you don't. Be there and just have a program that is credible, stay behind it, and it's going to work. It doesn't cost a thing to show that you care.
Can you tell me about one particular child that you remember specifically? I know everybody that works in the field always has one that really stands out in their mind as someone who that you can talk about, that sort of typifies the type of child that you deal with.
Well, I can go both ways on that. I have a sad story and a good story. And the one is that, and I work with this young man day in and day out, just a typical confused, which is the best word I could use. Confused, really didn't, was pulled 9 different directions. I learned just a few years ago that he eventually killed himself. As an adult, worked with him a lot. He was a good kid. He was a good kid. I was more worried about him running away or doing something silly like that. I didn't worry about him killing himself, but I heard that he killed himself, and that saddens me a great deal. I also got an email from a young man just recently that said, I remember when you brought me in the office and sat me down and said, we're not going to have another, and referred to the name of a student that I had to deal with quite a bit, and that he was going to straighten out, and I was going to be there watching him, and he wrote me the email and said thank you, and that he's doing great and has a child. That's just one, and you can go on and on and on. So the good so far outweighs the bad, and it didn't cost a penny.